Modern optical lenses, massive reflecting telescopes, and digital sensors. How was it conceivable to decipher the complex mechanics of the heavens with millimetric precision, relying exclusively on the immutable geometry of stone and an impeccable mathematical intellect deep within the all-consuming dense jungles of Mesoamerica? Tonight, we take a solemn step into that uncompromising and profoundly satisfying intellectual depth your mind currently seeks, delving into one of history's most sophisticated astronomical enigmas. Here, there is no place for the hurried rhythm of the modern epoch, the superficial data that merely skims the surface of understanding, or the distractive clamor that occupies the contemporary mind. Instead, you are embarking on a journey constructed solely by the sheer gravitational weight of knowledge itself, a descent into a venerated academic pursuit, ancient masonry, and centuries of absolute, undisturbed silence. On this expedition, you, operating as a silent researcher and privileged observer, will wander through the corridors of that colossal mental architecture dedicated entirely to numerical sequences and celestial cycles. We shall commence our study amidst the rustling folios of the Dresden Codex, pages yellowed by the toll of time and climate, meticulously forged from the beaten inner bark of the amate tree and impeccably plastered with calcium carbonate. We will trace the rigorous astronomical calculations concealed behind every intricate geometric glyph on those pages, unraveling the chilling, unyielding precision of Venus's synodic cycle. Subsequently, we will transition from the cool, dimly lit and dusty library archives of Europe directly into the depths of Mesoamerica's impenetrable, emerald-canopied rainforests. There, we shall step into the legendary Jade Observatory, a chamber enclosed by dark, monolithic limestone walls, untouched by human footsteps for millennia, an architectural marvel which awakens exclusively on specific, mathematically calculated equinox nights. As you advance silently across the flagstone floor of the antiquated library, your fingers glide deliberately over the massive carved walnut desk, its surface gleaming with a profound smoothness bestowed by centuries of scholarly friction. This historical threshold opening before you serves as an invitation into a cosmic vault, constructed not merely to record the cyclical movements of the stars, but to domesticate the very abstraction of time itself. The centurial scent of dry, cold masonry intertwines with the sweet, dense smoke of copal resin drifting imperceptibly through the air. Meanwhile, all external chaos, all mundane tension, and every senseless rush remains situated far beyond these thick limestone barricades, confined to an unreachable, irrelevant distance. The structural architecture of the universe waits to converse with you, strictly through the vernacular of absolute stillness. This slow, meticulously detailed and dignified whisper of antiquity now commences. Those ancient, colossal astronomical gears begin to turn silently once more. Thousand-year-old numerical values begin to construct their own immutable mathematics within the profound depths of your intellect. Underneath a pale vaulted ceiling supported by towering, frigid limestone columns, you find yourself situated in the most secluded, profoundly silent quadrant of a colossal 19th century European library. Outside, there exists the unobtrusive murmur of a muffled wind brushing rhythmically against the tall, lead-paned, thick-glassed windows. Within, however, an absolute and dignified stagnation prevails. Resting upon a massive, dark walnut study desk, a fixture that has remained immobilized for centuries, its grain burnished to an impeccable smoothness by the attrition of time, lies a historical anomaly, illuminated by the dim, yellowish cast of a solitary reading lamp. The Dresden Codex. The atmospheric composition is heavy, saturated with the scent of desiccating inks, fragmenting parchment, and the fine, grey accumulation of centurial dust settling upon the surrounding shelves. The sheer gravitational weight of the thousands of bound volumes encircling you imparts an insulated, almost palpable stasis to the chamber. Your hands move across the surface of this desk with an exceedingly deliberate, reverent cadence. Extending before you is not a conventional European manuscript bound at a central spine, but rather an elongated, continuous ribbon of data, folded in an accordion-like configuration. The texture you perceive as your fingertips make contact with the page does not resemble the familiar, pliant smoothness of paper manufactured from cotton or linen fibers. This is the archaic amate paper, a material forged through the meticulous stripping of the inner bark of ficus trees grown deep within the Mesoamerican rainforests, steeped for days in an alkaline solution of water and wood ash, and subsequently subjected to hours of unyielding compression, bludgeoned by heavy wooden mallets. You feel that slight, chalky, arid and dense tactility beneath your fingers, a consequence of the surface being rigorously plastered with an infinitesimal layer of white lime or calcium carbonate applied to prevent the dispersal of the ink. As each segment is turned with agonizing slowness, the thick, rustling and resonant acoustic signature of century-old lime and desiccated wood fiber echoes briefly within the library's silence, only to dissipate. Your eyes begin to trace the complex geometric glyphs rendered in black and red soot ink, gleaming faintly beneath the pallid illumination of the lamp. At a superficial glance, these might manifest merely as anomalous faces, zoological figures, or mythological tableaus. Yet, as your intellect commences the laborious decryption of the cold, flawless and colossal mathematics concealed behind these symbols, the silence of the environment deepens exponentially. During the epochs when Europe was grappling with the decimal system, yet to fully actualize the epistemological concept of zero, the Maya were already employing a vigesimal, or base 20, numerical framework, a system structurally inspired by the totality of human anatomy, calculating through the aggregate of fingers and toes. You observe the hierarchical arrangement on the page with acute scrutiny. The numerical values are not aligned in a horizontal continuum, rather they are constructed vertically, ascending from bottom to top, mimicking a stratified architectural monument rising from the earth toward the celestial sphere. The foundational tier denotes singular units. The subsequent elevation represents multiples of 20. The tier above that signifies multiples of 400, scaling upward to increments of 8,000. And in the construction of these towering numerical monoliths, only 3 rudimentary, elegant symbols are utilized. A solitary dot designating a single unit, a thick horizontal bar representing 5 units, and the foundational keystone of this entire systemic paradigm, a stylized mollusk shell, rendered as the flawless manifestation of the void, of absolute completion, the zero. Your mind observes the dots and bars superimposing upon one another, metamorphosing into massive blocks of mathematical data that articulate millions within fractions of a second, registering this not with haste, but by surrendering entirely to the narcotic flow of pure logic. As you arrive at the juncture between the 46th and 50th pages of the Codex, you are confronted with one of the most astonishing astronomical matrices in human history, inscribed across that thick amate substrate, the Venus tables. Within the stagnant atmosphere of the archive, your cognition gradually transcends the boundaries of the terrestrial atmosphere, locking onto the colossal, silently turning gears of celestial mechanics. The prolonged cycle of the planet Venus, from its initial manifestation in the terrestrial sky to its disappearance behind the solar mass and its subsequent resurrection as the morning star. Contemporary astrophysicists, relying upon advanced sensors and massive optical refractors, calculate this synodic period at precisely 583.92 days. Yet, upon this lime-coated, archaic bark paper positioned before you, this exact orbital duration is engraved with an immaculate rhythm as exactly 584 days, calculated relying exclusively upon naked eye observation and the fixed reference points provided by stone masonry. Furthermore, The genuinely intimidating magnitude of this mathematical intellect is concealed within the fractional discrepancies. The complex corrective algorithms appended to the conclusion of the tables to rectify that microscopic deviation of 0.08 days, demonstrating the Maya astronomers' acute awareness of this temporal drift, stretch methodically across the folios before you. It is a mathematical deduction spanning hundreds of years, relying on observational data transferred meticulously across generations. A strategic subtraction of 4 days applied precisely every 61 Venusian years. The realization that data was processed with such infallibility, over such an extended temporal horizon, and with such cold calculation, drapes an intellectual satisfaction over the human mind, as weighty and insulating as a heavy textile. Intermittently, the elegant, smooth scratch of your quill pen is heard as you inscribe minute notations onto a sheet of parchment resting at the periphery of your desk. Thereafter, you plunge once more into the profundities of the Codex. As the numerical values multiply and multi-millennial temporal cycles are reduced to a mere configuration of dots and bars upon the paper, the inescapable reality that such a calculation could not possibly be executed exclusively upon a two-dimensional plane settles heavily into your consciousness. These computations, prior to being distilled onto these pages, had to be observed, quantified, and carved into stone elsewhere. This amate paper, illuminated under the dim lamp of a European library, was merely a shadow. The primary mechanism, the authentic instrument of measurement, remained concealed thousands of miles from where these pages were authored, interred for centuries beneath the crushing weight of monolithic foliage and an asphyxiating green expanse. It lay within that colossal architecture built through the mathematics of stone and light, within that flawless observatory which awakens solely on designated nights. As the cool, particulate-laden atmosphere of the European library and the heavy susurration of yellowed folios gradually dissolve from your consciousness, your cognitive focus drifts steadily toward the primary coordinates, where those complex numerical matrices upon the desk manifested into a physical reality, materialized in stone weighing thousands of tons. Transcending oceans and centuries, your intellect descends directly into the very heart of Mesoamerica's unrelenting, all-consuming, colossal emerald ocean. Surrounding you are no longer the rigid, predictable structures of library shelves. Rather, you are enveloped by an impenetrable canopy formed by towering mahogany and saber trees, an arboreal ceiling that entirely eclipses the firmament, shattering the solar radiation long before it can make contact with the terrestrial floor. In the external environment, a profound, perpetual and uninterrupted biological hum prevails. A heavy, low-frequency acoustic saturation generated by millions of stridulating insects, the wind oscillating through massive foliage, and the pervasive humidity seeping into the soil, resonating almost as if it were the deep respiratory cadence of the earth itself. Yet, you are not situated within this biological chaos. You stand precisely before a flawless geometric anomaly, driven like a seal into the core of this forest, an architectural construct that the dense vegetation has fundamentally failed to consume. Navigating through the dense undergrowth, you step across the narrow, lowered threshold of a monolithic structure constructed from massive limestone blocks, the Jade Observatory. In the exact microsecond you cross that boundary, the suffocating tropical humidity and the chaotic acoustic wall of the exterior environment are instantaneously severed. This space operates as an astronomical isolation chamber, entirely insulated from the entropy of the outside world. The air permeating the interior is distinctly cool, devoid of moisture, profoundly stagnant, and carries the heavy centurial olfactory signature of desiccated masonry. Positioned precisely at the epicenter of the chamber, upon a flat stone altar, the muffled, rhythmic crackling of copal resin is audible, combusting with an agonizing slowness that mimics a steady biological respiration. The sweet, narcotic and dense smoke ascending from this resin drifts in lethargic convolutions toward the vaulted ceiling, further deepening the solemn, academic gravity of the environment. As your optical faculties acclimate to the obscurity, you recognize that this circular chamber was not erected through conventional masonry techniques. Rather, it functions as a mathematically perfect sphere of absolute acoustic and optical isolation. The barricades encompassing you have been engineered with a colossal thickness, purposefully designed to withstand the invasive, destructive root systems and cataclysmic meteorological events of the exterior wilderness for millennia. Yet, the genuine marvel of engineering is not situated within the raw tonnage of these limestone blocks, but rather concealed within the chemical composition of that flawless burnish coating the interior surface. A finish that, as you trace your hand across it, transmits not the thermal conductivity of cold rock, but the immaculate, frictionless smoothness of glass. Gliding your fingertips methodically over the curvature of this wall, you comprehend that the archaic plastering technique the Maya designated as stucco represents not merely an aesthetic endeavor, but an act of profound organic chemical genius. Behind this surface lies a temporal expanse of heavy, mechanized physical labor. During the architectural inception of the structure, thousands of tons of limestone were calcined over wood fires for days, fragmented and subsequently hydrated to produce quicklime, a process generating a violently exothermic reaction. However, the precise detail that elevated Maya architects above conventional stonemasons materialized at this exact juncture. Pure lime mortar inevitably fractures and disintegrates over extended chronological periods. Therefore, to synthesize a compound capable of sheathing the walls of this observatory like an impenetrable carapace, the bark of the endemic chukum tree, harvested from the surrounding rainforest, was integrated into the matrix. Within your intellect, you can reconstruct that laborious process of construction. The bark of the chukum tree is subjected to prolonged boiling in massive vats, yielding a blood-red botanical extract exceptionally rich in tannins and natural resins. When this viscous, organic fluid is mechanically homogenized with pulverized calcium carbonate, the resulting amalgamation is not a rudimentary cement, but a highly resilient, hydrophobic organic polymer that progressively petrifies over time. Your fingers, maintaining contact with the walls, perceive the millimetric expenditure of labor required to apply this resinous plaster, stratum by stratum, to the interior of this circular geometry centuries ago. However, the chemical reaction served merely as the preliminary phase. The fundamental reason the observatory walls possess such an immaculate, frictionless topography, the methodology by which they were transformed into a reflective medium capable of manipulating light, resides within an inherently hypnotic, grueling, and relentless ritual of mechanical abrasion. While the plaster remained in a transitional state of curing, the artisans took up perfectly spherical riverstones, meticulously selected and transported from fluvial deposits hundreds of kilometers away. Objects rendered flawlessly smooth by the hydrostatic friction of millennia. And subsequently, the acoustic phenomenon commenced. That dense, rhythmic, reverberating and inexhaustible sound of stone grinding continuously against stone. It was a narcotic repetition, driven by the wrists executing identical circular vectors, applying a constant, unyielding pressure, passing over the exact same spatial coordinates tens of thousands of times. This localized mechanical friction was sustained with a rhythm so protracted and so intractable that the microthermal energy generated by the river stones literally crystallized the surface molecules of the lime-chukum composite. Every microscopic pore across the surface was systematically obliterated. Beneath the weight of those heavy metronomic movements, the initially matte and coarse plaster gradually began to exhibit a high specular reflectance, capable of refracting light, ultimately achieving its hardened, vitreous texture. You are standing within a massive, hollow limestone shell, where every square centimeter of the interior surface has been manually compressed and burnished, accompanied by the dignified, grinding whisper of ancient stones. Now, as you position yourself at the exact geometric center of this dim chamber, you observe precisely how the flawless curvature of the walls absorbs all acoustic reflection, and how it diffuses the luminescence of the combusting copal resin into a soft, ambient halo throughout the room. The colossal, low-frequency roar of the exterior rainforest remains relegated to the opposite side of these thick, resinous and crystallized barriers, reduced to a fragile, inconsequential memory. The entire structural paradigm has been architecturally calculated to fulfill a singular objective: to ensure that a solitary beam of light, descending through a narrow zenith shaft during a highly specific celestial alignment on a designated night, can reflect across these frictionless walls without encountering a single microscopic imperfection. The profound silence of the architecture envelops your intellect. As the acoustic reverberations along the resinous, crystallized walls of the observatory gradually attenuate within your consciousness, your optical focus drifts, almost involuntarily, toward the geometric center of this dim chamber. Specifically, downward to the impeccably leveled expanse of the flagstone floor. The atmospheric volume within is so profoundly stagnant, so devoid of kinetic energy, that the peripheries of the colossal, concertina-folded astronomical maps, meticulously arrayed across the pavement to capture the total mathematics of the firmament within a physical dimension, exhibit not the slightest tremor. The surface is enveloped, from one extremity to the other, by codices resting like pale, alabaster archipelagos scattered across a lightless, petrified sea. Your intellect, detaching itself from the vertical, insular architecture of the barricades, descends steadily toward this horizontal, continuous, and boundless topographical plane of data. And at that precise temporal coordinate, piercing through the inexhaustible low-frequency hum of the exterior wilderness, you begin to perceive a profoundly muffled, highly rhythmic, and neurologically narcotic acoustic anomaly, pulsing akin to the very vascular throb of time itself. A deep, percussive thump, thump, thump. This auditory phenomenon does not belong to the chronological present of the surrounding forest. It is, rather, a phantom reverberation ingrained within the masonry, the acoustic residue of that solemn, centurial manufacturing process, during which the elongated fibrous ribbons currently arrayed before you were transmuted into the permanent memory apparatus of the cosmos. You incline your posture toward the pavement, allowing your fingertips to glide deliberately across those pleated, multi-metered topographical strips. This material shares no structural taxonomy with the silken threads of the Orient or the woven cellulosic cottons of the European continent. This is the authentic amate bark substrate, a material excavated from the dense botanical mass of Mesoamerica strictly through an unyielding mechanical persistence and a rigorous chemical endurance. Accompanied by that rhythmic, percussive cadence, your cognition drifts backward to the anatomical origins of this paper. The methodology commenced with the expert stripping of the thick, aged exterior bark from the massive trunks of ficus trees, cultivated within the hyperhumid microclimates of the jungle. However, the substrate upon which the astronomers would engrave the orbital trajectories of the stars was not this heavily lignified outer shell. The primary objective was the vascular cambium situated immediately beneath, the thin, highly fibrous and nascent inner layer known as the phloem, the very tissue responsible for transporting the tree's vital botanical fluids. Once these moist, viscous fibers were meticulously extricated from the trunk in unbroken ribbons, they were submerged within massive vats positioned along the riverbanks, steeped in a highly alkaline suspension composed of water and concentrated wood ash. Over a span of several diurnal cycles, governed entirely by the lethargic pace of natural chemical degradation, the highly basic, corrosive nature of the ash water systematically dissolved the rigid lignin polymers binding the material together, leaving behind nothing but a highly pliant, pure cellulosic matrix. That very rhythmic, deep oscillation echoing within your intellect, the thump, 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 originates from the precise moment this saturated cellulosic network was extracted from the aquatic solution and draped across frictionlessly smoothed stone anvils. The Maya artisans, wielding flat, exceedingly heavy mallets of dense hardwood or stone deeply scored with parallel grooves, struck the wet fibers for hours, for days, without the slightest permissible deviation in their metronomic rhythm. With every applied impact, the cellular structure was crushed. As it was crushed, it expanded laterally, and as it expanded, the individual strands interlocked at a near molecular level, forging a monolithic, structurally homogeneous membrane. As your digits currently traverse the surface of the codex, they perceive the microscopic topography, the infinitesimal crests and valleys of the vertical and horizontal fibrous undulations generated by those thousands of blunt force applications. Yet a rudimentary sheet of beaten botanical tissue could not function as an adequate foundation upon which to draft immaculate mathematical equations and complex astronomical charts. The inherent porosity of the fibers would absorb and uncontrollably diffuse any applied pigment. You shift your acute attention to the thin, chalky, stark white veneer that entirely obliterates the organic brown hue of the underlying bark. This coating is calcium carbonate, the identical calcitic compound utilized in their monumental architecture, yet rigorously sifted, repeatedly hydrated until fully slaked and reduced to a flawlessly smooth, colloidal suspension. This calcareous paste was manually troweled across the desiccating amate sheets utilizing broad, polished mollusk shells, hermetically sealing the microscopic voids between every individual fiber with the dense mineral compound. Upon total evaporation of the moisture, what remained was an unparalleled synthesis of organic flexibility and inorganic rigidity. A surface that did not absorb light, possessed the tensile strength of cured vellum and the frictionless topography of polished stone. Your neural processing slows measurably, merely contemplating the millimetric patience required for the architectural construction of this substrate, surrendering completely to the dispassionate, metronomic current of the narrative. Your optical receptors now lock onto the black and crimson figures, the precision-drafted points and bars, and the complex quadrangular glyphs expertly inscribed upon this calcified, stark white expanse. The fluid utilized to render these geometric forms was no arbitrary pigment. The black chromaticity was synthesized through the asphyxiating, anaerobic combustion of highly resinous pine heartwood and sweet copal within sealed kilns. The resulting dense, heavy carbon soot was then meticulously ground into an emulsion with specialized botanical oils and water over a period of consecutive days. The crimson hue, conversely, constituted a dense iron oxide-laden pigment, extracted either from pulverized hematite minerals or the microscopically crushed exoskeletons of the cochineal insect. This highly viscous ink, applied to the substrate via fine, rigid reed brushes, bonded with the microscopic porosity of the calcium carbonate stratum so tenaciously that even the corrosive passage of a millennium failed to dissolve or degrade its razor-sharp boundaries. As you survey the codices mapped across the pavement, you begin to grasp not merely the complex metallurgical and organic chemistry of the materials, but the profoundly heavy, epistemologically crushing philosophy of time itself, codified by that carbon ink. As the numerical sequences propagate across the folios, you realize that the linear European perception of chronology, a straight, unyielding vector advancing irreversibly from the past into the future, possesses no validity within this paradigm. For the Maya intellect, time was never a consumable, finite path propelling inexorably forward. Time was a colossal, gravitationally immense, stone-hewn system of interlocking gears, a cosmic mechanism that intermeshed with absolute geometric perfection, perpetually revolving to return to its exact point of origin. The auditory hallucination of the metronome within your consciousness now merges seamlessly with the grinding acoustics of massive calendrical cogs. Your cognitive faculties begin to revolve around the primary, innermost gear, the 260-day Tzolk'in cycle, an intricate framework predicated upon the human gestational period, the agricultural maturation phases of maize, and a deeper, galactic rhythm. It is a highly ritualized mathematical wheel generated by the inexorable, sequential multiplication of 13 numerical coefficients against 20 named diurnal units. As the Tzolk'in completes its axial rotation, its rigid teeth interlock precisely with a significantly more massive, heavier exterior gear, the Harb, the 365-day civil calendar engineered to record the solar cycle with millimetric exactitude. Within the theatre of your intellect, you conceptualize the rotation of these two colossal stone gears, grinding against each other within the cosmic void with an exceedingly slow, profoundly silent momentum. In order for the smaller 260-tooth gear and the larger 365-tooth gear to synchronize and return to their exact original point of mutual alignment, tens of thousands of diurnal rotations had to transpire. The solar and lunar masses had to ascend and descend an astronomical number of times. It required precisely 52 solar years, the immense chronological epoch the Maya classified as the calendar round. And upon the exact completion of that 52-year cycle, the entire mechanism reset itself with an absolute, terrifying silence. Everything commenced anew, possessing the identical gravitational weight as the very first day. The inherent psychological stress generated by the unpredictable variables of a linear temporal trajectory is entirely usurped by the absolute, immutable, and secure predictability of cyclical time. These astronomical records, propagating endlessly across the Codex folios, did not merely document the coordinates of Venus or the exactitude of the equinoxes. They served as the empirical verification of the universe's unemotional, unshakable rhythm, operating as a flawless mechanical construct. This horizontal, uninterrupted, and profoundly heavy flow of data continues to drag your intellect across a flat, frictionless plateau, entirely devoid of turbulence. As the distant, muffled impact of the wooden mallets upon the wet cellulose intertwines with the phantom grinding of the colossal stone gears within your mind, the sheer mass of mechanical tranquility collapses completely upon your consciousness. These topographical maps of time, sprawling across the observatory floor, remain in a state of suspended animation, awaiting the descent of that pure optical data, the starlight, from the zenith above. You gradually detach yourself from the infinite cycles of the amate codices arrayed across the pavement, and from the mechanical tranquility generated within your intellect by those massive mathematical gears. The atmospheric volume within the observatory has now achieved a state of absolute stasis. At the precise center of the chamber, upon the flat stone altar, the copal resin that has been combusting imperceptibly for hours is slowly approaching its terminal phase of oxidation. The thin, muffled crackling of the fire becomes increasingly intermittent, yielding solely to the profoundly deep, whisper-like acoustic residue generated by its own thermal dissipation. Within this lightless, isolated enclosure, the gargantuan mechanics of the heavens approach their zenith. The absolute, mathematically predictable alignment of the equinox with millimetric infallibility. Your gaze, enveloped in the obscurity, ascends with agonizing slowness toward the exact center of the observatory's vaulted ceiling, locking onto that narrow architectural shaft cut with a mathematically flawless geometric trajectory. This void was not a rudimentary ventilation aperture left arbitrarily by ancient stonemasons. This narrow tunnel serves as a frozen, calcified formula, a structural codification of decades of immovable observation, accounting precisely for the 23.5-degree axial tilt of our planet and the protracted precessional movement of the stars. As the Earth sustains its silent, colossal rotation upon its axis, a pale, silvery beam of starlight traveling from the profound depths of the cosmos begins to drift downward. Arriving at the exact, mathematically anticipated microsecond, it glides stealthily into the darkness of the chamber, descending through the shaft without ever making contact with its stonework perimeters. This vertical, millimetric descent of light proceeds toward the floor with immense gravity, quite literally hovering, manifesting as a physical particle of time itself. The absolute target of this descending stellar beam is the singular object positioned exactly at the center of the chamber, elevated slightly upon a monolithic stone pedestal and encircled by complex mathematical glyphs. This artifact is jadeite, a dark green, translucent and unimaginably dense mineral, violently extracted from the subterranean veins of the Mesoamerican tectonic plates. The human mind decelerates profoundly when observing the flawless, perfectly hemispherical morphology of this stone, struggling to comprehend the crushing, obstinate and hypnotic mechanical labor concealed behind its creation. Jadeite does not classify as a conventional geological formation. Owing to its microscopic, heavily interlocked crystallographic structure, forged by sodium and aluminum silicate minerals fusing under incomprehensible hydrostatic pressures deep within the Earth's crust, it possesses an inherent tensile resistance surpassing even modern steel, rendering it virtually immune to fragmentation. Within the grasp of the Maya, there existed no metallurgical implements whatsoever to fracture, incise, or manipulate this material. In the total absence of iron, steel, or bronze alloys, the epistemological conundrum of how this unyielding mineral achieved the immaculate smoothness of an optical lens leaves a profoundly heavy echo resonating within your consciousness. The underlying mechanism of this perfection is concealed entirely within the inexhaustible, unemotional repetition of chronological time and mechanical friction. Within the theatre of your intellect, you reconstruct that heavy, neurologically numbing procedure, an uninterrupted, metronomic rhythm sustained for months, perhaps traversing across years. The artisans secured the raw mass of jadeite upon an immovable foundation, utilizing the only material on the continent possessing a superior hardness to abrade it: pure, unadulterated quartz sand, painstakingly sifted from ancient riverbeds. Highly flexible straps, woven tightly from animal hides and thick agave fibers, were saturated with a highly abrasive suspension of this fine quartz sand and aqueous fluid, subsequently drawn taut across the surface of the stone. Following this preparation, the infinite, reciprocating kinetic motion commenced. Forward and backward, forward and backward. That high-frequency, exceptionally faint, glass-like resonance, generated by the continuous friction of the leather strap and the quartz abrasive grinding against the jadeite, seems to reverberate from the observatory walls across a chasm of centuries. For months, adhering to a relentless daily cycle, maintaining identical pressure parameters and angular trajectories, the leather and sand eroded the mineral matrix, millimeter by millimeter, micron by micron. This endeavor transcended mere physical labor. It constituted a meditative, mechanical treaty forged between the sheer resistance of the material and the unyielding endurance of human biology. The topography of the stone initially lost its luster, subsequently and gradually shedding its angular geometry as it began to soften. As the abrasive process advanced, utilizing increasingly finer grades of particulate sand alongside the flawless lubrication of water, the deep, nephritic, cloudy green texture trapped within the jadeite emerged. Every microscopic surface imperfection was systematically obliterated, transforming the mineral into a vitreous carapace that refused to absorb incoming light, choosing instead to imprison the luminescence within its own internal geometry. And precisely now, within this stagnant microsecond of the equinoctial night, the razor-thin beam of starlight drifting from the zenith strikes the flawless jadeite, the direct consequence of months of that hypnotic mechanical exertion. The exact instant the photons interface with the unblemished surface at a millimetric trajectory, the silent laws of optical physics activate. The dense, crystallized internal matrix of the jadeite does not merely reflect the light directly back into the void like a rudimentary mirror. Conversely, it draws the electromagnetic radiation deep into its microscopic crystal lattices, bending it via its extreme refractive index, decelerating the photons, and subsequently dispersing the beam throughout the chamber as a significantly broader, softly diffused network of illumination. This precise moment of optical refraction transmutes the stagnation of the chamber into a visual, mathematical symphony. The cold, geometric waves of light, expanding as they drift outward from the jadeite core, strike directly against the curved, frictionless walls of the room, surfaces rigorously plastered with chukum tree resin and calcium carbonate, burnished into a reflective state over days of relentless friction with riverstones. The immaculate curvature of the barricades and their crystallized calcareous texture simultaneously absorb the light while displaying it with high contrast brilliance against the lightless background. Within mere seconds, the interior volume of this thick limestone vault transforms into an astronomical projection sphere, a colossal lithic planetarium. Upon the walls, the highly stylized shadows and illuminated reflections of those ancient constellations, observed and chronicled exclusively by the Maya intellect, begin to materialize, rendering the coordinates of Venus, the Pleiades cluster, and the belt of Orion. The millimetric refractions generated by the natural internal fault lines of the jadeite project intricate geometric patterns upon the wall, resembling the gossamer threads of a spider's web, functioning as the connective pathways of a celestial map. The colossal architecture of the cosmos has been flawlessly duplicated within this small, isolated chamber buried deep within the jungle, coded through the uncompromising mathematics of stone, botanical resin, and starlight. The massive, low-frequency roar carried by the exterior wind is thoroughly crushed beneath the weight of this silent, optical exhibition, descending even further into a profoundly deeper, heavily narcotic frequency. Enveloped in the profound reverence of an astrophysicist observing a cosmic anomaly, your intellect tracks the heavy, gliding movement of these millimetric reflections across the plaster. As this silent dialogue between electromagnetic radiation and mineralogy presents empirical data in its purest, most cognitively exhausting and deeply satisfying state, your perception of linear time slowly disintegrates. Every element remains perfectly stagnant, strictly confined to its designated spatial coordinate, and the mathematics of the universe operate with absolute, flawless silence within these resinous walls. While the Earth sustains its infallible rotation along its colossal, mute orbital trajectory with millimetric resolve, the silvery beam of starlight filtering through the narrow, flawlessly geometric shaft at the zenith of the limestone vault begins to gradually relinquish its precise angle of refraction. Accompanied by the dignified tranquility inherent to the completion of a centurial mandate and dictated as an inevitable consequence of our planet's axial tilt, intertwined with the inexhaustible, lethargic procession of the celestial sphere, this optical data arriving from the profound depths of the cosmos fails to maintain contact with the perimeters of that structural tunnel, retracting millimeter by agonizing millimeter. The concentrated cosmic luminescence, hitherto imprisoned within the dense, dark green core of the jadeite mineral, a substance completely vitrified by months of relentless abrasive processing, slowly attenuates, surrendering absolutely to the natural, cold darkness of the stone itself. Concomitant with the departure of these photons from the crystallized internal matrix of the jadeite, the astronomical spectacle projected upon the circular, frictionless walls of the chamber, meticulously hermetically sealed with chukum botanical resin and calcium carbonate, likewise drifts toward a heavy, protracted conclusion. The delicate, gossamer-like geometric map of the constellations, tracing the coordinates of Venus and the belt of Orion across the plaster, dissolves into the consuming obscurity of the room. An evaporation executed with the exact, respectful silence as the heavy, amate bark pages of the Dresden Codex being definitively closed. At this current temporal coordinate, there remains absolutely no kinetic movement, no optical anomaly, and no residual chemical reaction within the interior space. The sweet copal resin positioned upon the flat pedestal has fully oxidized into inert ash. The dense aromatic smoke it previously diffused throughout the environment has yielded unconditionally to the heavy, stagnant centurial odor of desiccated masonry and cooled lime. As you stand stationed at the absolute geometric center of this colossal cosmic vault, you perceive with your entire intellectual capacity that chronology does not flow along a linear, finite vector. Conversely, you sense the immensely massive stone gears of the Zolkin and Harb calendrical systems interlocking upon each other once again, successfully finalizing that flawless, unyielding cycle of the universe. The mathematical reckoning has reached its terminal point. The observatory recedes into its impenetrable, silent, and highly venerated isolation deep within the heart of the colossal rainforest, entering a state of suspended animation until the arrival of the subsequent cosmic alignment, the next equinox night. The profound, low-frequency acoustic saturation, that heavy botanical hum carried by the atmospheric currents striking the expansive foliage of the massive mahogany trees outside, begins to steadily seep back through the thick limestone barricades corresponding with the withdrawal of the celestial light, reinvading the absolute vacuum of the chamber with its own ancient, constant frequency. The sheer gravitational mass of this colossal empire, constructed entirely from chronology and numerical values, systematically guides that enveloping intellectual fatigue toward its final, most permanent physiological stage. As the isolated beam of starlight glides imperceptibly from the flawless topography of the jadeite and assimilates into the surrounding obscurity, the gargantuan orbital cycle of the heavens completes its revolution once more. That mute mathematics, engraved into the bedrock by the Maya intellect millennia ago, now reverberates exclusively within the archaic wind oscillating through the forest canopy. Here, enclosed within these heavily fortified architectural stones, the concept of time possesses absolutely no velocity. As your cognition fundamentally aligns with the dense, secure tranquility derived exclusively from the weight of empirical knowledge, mirroring the profound, undisturbed night descending upon these monolithic ruins, historical antiquity withdraws deliberately into its own centurial stagnation. The millennial integers have ceased their computation. May the voiceless mechanics of the cosmos and this unparalleled, absolute silence remain with you.